There comes a moment in life when you stop asking why someone pulls away and begin asking a far more important question. What does true effort look like from someone who fears closeness? Many people misunderstand avoidant personalities. They believe distance always means indifference, silence always means rejection, and emotional walls can never be lowered. But reality is often much more subtle. Not everyone who steps back wants to leave. Sometimes, the greatest sign of love comes from the person who struggles the most to express it. The mistake most people make is expecting everyone to love in the same language. They measure affection through constant messages, endless reassurance, or dramatic displays of emotion. Yet some individuals carry wounds that taught them closeness was dangerous. Their instinct is not to chase, it is to protect themselves. And when someone like this chooses to act against that instinct, they are revealing something far more valuable than empty words. They are showing courage. Today, we will uncover one powerful behavior that changes everything. A single action that separates someone who is merely keeping you around from someone who is quietly fighting their deepest fears just to keep you in their life. If you recognize this sign, you must understand its true meaning before you let frustration or misunderstanding destroy something rare. Listen carefully until the very end, because this lesson is not only about relationships. It is about understanding human nature, emotional healing, and the silent battles that people rarely speak about. Sometimes the strongest form of love is not loud. It is hidden inside the smallest acts of vulnerability. And once you learn to recognize it, you may never look at people or yourself the same way again. Most people assume that an avoidant person will never truly open their heart. They believe emotional distance is a permanent wall, something that cannot be crossed no matter how much love exists. Because of this belief, they often overlook the smallest but most meaningful moments of change. They wait for dramatic confessions, endless affection, or constant reassurance, not realizing that someone with an avoidant attachment style expresses courage in ways that are much quieter. If there is one sign that deserves your full attention, it is when they choose vulnerability instead of distance. This decision is not ordinary for them. It goes against years of emotional conditioning and deeply rooted habits that were built for protection rather than connection. Avoidant individuals are not necessarily afraid of people. More often, they are afraid of what closeness demands. Intimacy requires trust, trust requires openness, and openness creates the possibility of pain. Somewhere in their life, they learned that depending on others could lead to disappointment, rejection, criticism, or emotional loss. Instead of confronting those painful memories directly, they developed a system that kept them safe. They became independent, emotionally reserved, and skilled at creating space whenever relationships became too intense. From the outside, this can appear cold or uncaring, but inside, there is often a constant struggle between wanting connection and fearing its consequences. When conflict appears in a relationship, many avoidant people instinctively withdraw. They become quieter. They delay conversations. They immerse themselves in work, hobbies, or anything that allows them to avoid emotional discomfort. This pattern is not always a sign that they no longer care. In many cases, it is the only strategy they know to regulate overwhelming emotions. Distance becomes their shield because vulnerability feels unfamiliar and dangerous. Now imagine someone whose natural instinct is to retreat, yet instead of disappearing, they decide to stay. Instead of avoiding the difficult conversation, they tell you they are confused. Instead of pretending everything is fine, they admit they are struggling. Instead of building another emotional wall, they allow you to see a piece of what is happening inside their mind. This moment may seem small to someone who communicates openly every day, but for an avoidant person, it can represent an enormous internal victory. True vulnerability is not measured by how emotional someone becomes. It is measured by how much risk they are willing to take. An avoidant person risks something deeply personal every time they admit fear, uncertainty, insecurity, or emotional need. They are stepping into unfamiliar territory where they no longer have complete control over the outcome. They know they could be misunderstood. They know they could be rejected. Yet they choose honesty instead of hiding. That decision deserves careful attention because it reflects trust that cannot be forced or demanded. Many relationships fail because one partner overlooks these quiet signs. They expect vulnerability to arrive in the form of romantic speeches or constant emotional availability. When it arrives as a simple sentence, like, "I don't know why this is difficult for me," they dismiss it as insignificant. They continue criticizing, accusing, or demanding more, unaware that the avoidant person has already taken one of the biggest emotional risks of their life. People often believe love is proven by intensity, but lasting relationships are built through repeated moments of courage. Every time an avoidant person chooses honesty over silence, they weaken the protective habits that once controlled them. Every difficult conversation they willingly enter becomes evidence that the relationship matters enough to challenge their deepest instincts. This transformation cannot happen overnight. It develops through patience, consistency, and emotional safety. One of the greatest mistakes is responding to vulnerability with judgment. Imagine someone revealing something they have hidden for years, only to hear criticism in return. The lesson they receive is not that honesty solved the problem. The lesson becomes that emotional openness creates more pain than silence ever did. Once that belief is reinforced, the walls grow even higher than before. This does not mean unhealthy behavior should be accepted without boundaries. Vulnerability is not an excuse for emotional neglect or repeated avoidance. Rather, it is an invitation to recognize genuine effort. There is a significant difference between someone who refuses to communicate and someone who is slowly learning how. Progress deserves encouragement, even when perfection has not yet been reached. Think about how trust develops in any meaningful relationship. It is not built because one person demands access to another's heart. Trust grows because each vulnerable moment is handled with care instead of punishment. When someone feels emotionally safe, they become less dependent on defensive patterns. They begin to realize that closeness no longer guarantees suffering. Their nervous system slowly learns a new experience, one where openness leads to understanding instead of rejection. This is why patience becomes one of the greatest forms of strength. Patience does not mean waiting endlessly while someone refuses to grow. It means recognizing sincere movement, even when that movement happens in small steps. An avoidant individual may not suddenly transform into the most expressive partner. They may still need moments of solitude. They may still struggle to identify complex emotions. Yet, if they consistently return, continue trying, and gradually reveal more of themselves, they are demonstrating a willingness to grow beyond old patterns. Emotional healing is rarely dramatic. It often happens through ordinary conversations where someone decides not to run away. It happens when they admit they were hurt instead of pretending they did not care. It happens when they ask for time but promise to return instead of disappearing without explanation. These moments may appear insignificant to outsiders, but they are milestones in a journey that requires tremendous courage. Many people search endlessly for perfect compatibility, forgetting that every meaningful relationship involves two imperfect individuals learning how to understand each other. Someone who naturally expresses every feeling will have different challenges than someone who keeps everything inside. Neither path is free from difficulty. What matters most is whether both people are moving toward greater honesty instead of greater distance. If an avoidant person begins sharing personal memories they rarely discuss, asking for your perspective, admitting they miss you, expressing fears about losing the relationship, or allowing you to witness emotions they once hid behind silence, Pay close attention. These are not random behaviors. They are signs that their emotional world is slowly opening. Every layer they remove represents years of self-protection being set aside in favor of trust. The strongest relationships are not built because two people never experience fear. They are built because fear no longer controls every decision. When someone who once escaped every difficult emotion begins choosing connection instead, they are demonstrating a level of commitment that cannot always be measured through words alone. Their vulnerability becomes a quiet declaration that you matter enough for them to face the very thing they have spent years trying to avoid. One of the greatest misunderstandings in modern relationships is the belief that love is measured by how emotionally expressive someone appears. People often look for passionate words, constant texting, grand romantic gestures, or endless reassurance. While these things can certainly have value, they are not always the most reliable indicators of genuine commitment. Especially when you are dealing with an avoidant person, words can be inconsistent, emotions can be difficult to express, and affection may not always arrive in the form you expect. This is why consistent effort matters far more than perfect communication. Many people become trapped in listening to promises instead of observing patterns. A person can say, "I love you," hundreds of times while making very little effort to protect the relationship. Another person may struggle to express those exact words, but continuously shows up when life becomes difficult. The difference between these two individuals is not found in what they say. It is found in what they repeatedly choose to do. Avoidant individuals often experience emotions much more deeply than they reveal. Their internal world is frequently hidden behind calm expressions or emotional restraint. Because vulnerability feels uncomfortable, they may not always know how to explain what they feel. Sometimes they need extra time to understand their own emotions before they can communicate them. This delay is often mistaken for a lack of care, when in reality it may simply reflect the way they process emotional experiences. This is why actions become far more meaningful than polished conversations. An avoidant person who consistently returns after needing space is demonstrating something important. Someone who remembers what matters to you, supports your goals, respects your boundaries, and quietly finds ways to remain present is showing commitment through behavior instead of performance. These actions require intention. They cannot be sustained without genuine investment. Consistency creates trust because it removes uncertainty. Human beings naturally feel safe around patterns they can predict. If someone repeatedly behaves with honesty, reliability, and respect, your nervous system gradually learns that this person is dependable. Trust does not appear because of one emotional conversation. It grows because today's actions resemble yesterday's actions, and tomorrow's actions continue following the same direction. Many relationships become unstable because people chase emotional highs instead of emotional stability. They mistake intensity for intimacy. A dramatic apology after repeated neglect may feel powerful in the moment, but it cannot replace months of inconsistent behavior. Likewise, passionate declarations of love lose meaning when they are followed by emotional disappearance every time conflict arises. An avoidant person who is genuinely committed often demonstrates growth in subtle but powerful ways. They begin responding more consistently. They become slightly more available than before. They remember conversations that matter to you. They check in even when doing so feels uncomfortable. They gradually become more reliable, not because someone forced them to change, but because the relationship has become important enough to challenge their old habits. Real effort is rarely loud. It often exists in everyday moments that many people overlook. It is answering a difficult message instead of avoiding it. It is keeping a promise even when life becomes stressful. It is apologizing sincerely after making a mistake instead of pretending nothing happened. It is making time despite a busy schedule because priorities are reflected through actions, not excuses. There is an important lesson hidden within consistency. Every repeated action shapes character. Someone who repeatedly chooses honesty becomes trustworthy. Someone who repeatedly chooses patience becomes dependable. Someone who repeatedly chooses the relationship over temporary comfort demonstrates emotional maturity. These patterns tell you far more about a person's intentions than occasional emotional displays ever could. This principle also protects you from false hope. Many people stay in unhealthy relationships because they become attached to isolated moments of affection. They remember the beautiful weekend, the heartfelt apology, or the emotional confession, while ignoring months of neglect that surrounded those moments. They confuse occasional kindness with lasting commitment. Yet consistency forces you to look beyond isolated events and evaluate the entire pattern. When observing an avoidant individual, ask yourself a simple question. Are they making gradual progress? Even if it is slow, growth is rarely perfect. There may still be setbacks. There may still be moments when fear temporarily wins. But if effort continues increasing over time, if communication becomes slightly healthier, if accountability becomes more frequent, and if emotional availability slowly expands, then you are witnessing someone actively working against deeply ingrained habits. Relationships are not sustained by perfection. They are sustained by repetition. Every healthy habit becomes stronger the more frequently it is practiced. Listening carefully, respecting boundaries, resolving conflict calmly, and choosing honesty all become easier through repetition. The same principle applies to avoidant individuals who are learning healthier ways of connecting. Every small success makes the next one slightly more achievable. This is why patience should always be balanced with observation. Patience without awareness becomes self-sacrifice. Observation without patience becomes judgment. Healthy relationships require both. You allow room for growth while honestly evaluating whether that growth is actually happening. You do not expect instant transformation, but you also do not ignore repeated patterns that show no willingness to improve. One remarkable quality of consistent effort is that it often appears during ordinary moments rather than extraordinary ones. Anyone can behave well during the excitement of a new relationship. Genuine character reveals itself after comfort replaces novelty. Does the person still make time for you months later? Do they still remember important details? Do they continue investing energy when life becomes demanding? These ordinary moments reveal extraordinary truths. An avoidant person who genuinely values you may never become the most emotionally expressive partner in the room. They may still need occasional solitude. They may still struggle to explain complicated feelings immediately. Yet despite these limitations, they continue choosing the relationship. They continue learning. They continue showing up. They continue making adjustments that were once unimaginable for them. It is also important to recognize that consistency does not mean perfection. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone experiences moments of stress, fear, or emotional exhaustion. The question is not whether mistakes occur. The question is what happens afterward. Does the person take responsibility? Do they return to repair the damage? Do they learn from the experience? Consistent effort includes the willingness to correct mistakes instead of repeating them endlessly. One of the strongest signs that an avoidant person is emotionally invested is when they begin creating routines that naturally include you. They make space for you in their schedule without feeling forced. They share updates about their day. They invite you into parts of their life that they previously kept private. They remember commitments because your presence has become integrated into their daily thinking rather than treated as an occasional obligation. Chocks possess a quiet honesty that words sometimes lack. Words can be influenced by emotion, pressure, or temporary excitement. Consistent behavior requires discipline. It reflects priorities. It reveals values. It exposes what truly matters beneath every explanation and every promise. Over time, actions become impossible to fake because maintaining genuine effort requires authentic desire. When an avoidant person repeatedly chooses connection over comfort, communication over silence, responsibility over excuses, and presence over emotional escape, they are offering something far more valuable than flawless conversations. They are demonstrating through consistent effort that the relationship has become important enough to reshape habits they once believed would never change. One of the greatest challenges in any relationship is knowing the difference between supporting someone and losing yourself in the process. This becomes even more important when you are connected to an avoidant person. Many people believe they must either chase constantly to keep the relationship alive or become completely detached to protect themselves. Neither approach creates a healthy bond. A rare connection survives not because one person pursues while the other withdraws, but because both individuals gradually learn how to meet each other with understanding, respect, and emotional balance. An avoidant person often values freedom as much as they value connection. This does not necessarily mean they want to be alone forever. More often, it means they fear relationships that feel controlling, overwhelming, or emotionally unpredictable. If every disagreement becomes a dramatic confrontation, or every request feels like pressure, their natural instinct is to create distance. The more trapped they feel, the stronger their desire to escape becomes. Many people respond to this distance by chasing harder. They send repeated messages, demand immediate answers, question every period of silence, and constantly seek reassurance. While these reactions usually come from fear rather than manipulation, they often produce the opposite of the intended result. The avoidant individual feels increasingly overwhelmed, while the anxious partner feels increasingly ignored. Both people become trapped in a cycle where each reaction strengthens the other's deepest fears. Real strength begins when you stop reacting emotionally to every moment of uncertainty. Instead of chasing someone every time they need space, you learn to remain grounded within yourself. This does not mean becoming cold or pretending not to care. It means refusing to allow fear to control your behavior. Emotional stability creates an environment where healthier communication becomes possible. One of the most attractive qualities any person can develop is emotional security. When you know your own worth, you no longer feel the need to force love, demand constant validation, or prove your value through endless sacrifice. You recognize that genuine relationships are built through mutual effort, not emotional desperation. This quiet confidence often gives an avoidant person the safety they need because they no longer feel responsible for managing another person's emotional state every moment of the day. Healthy boundaries become essential in protecting a rare connection. Boundaries are often misunderstood as walls that keep people apart. In reality, healthy boundaries create the conditions that allow relationships to remain respectful and sustainable. They communicate what behavior is acceptable, what needs require attention, and how both people can feel emotionally safe without losing their individuality. If an avoidant person asks for a little time to process emotions, but consistently returns to continue the conversation, respecting that request demonstrates trust rather than weakness. Giving someone healthy space is very different from accepting endless emotional absence. One reflects mutual respect. The other reflects emotional neglect. Learning to recognize this difference prevents unnecessary suffering. Another mistake people frequently make is trying to rescue someone from every emotional struggle. They believe love means solving every problem, fixing every fear, or carrying every emotional burden. Yet lasting growth cannot be forced upon another person. Every individual must eventually choose healing for themselves. Your role is not to become someone's therapist or savior. Your role is to create an environment where honesty, accountability, and mutual respect can continue growing. An avoidant person who genuinely values the relationship will eventually begin meeting your effort with their own. They may not move at the same speed as you, but they begin making noticeable adjustments. They initiate conversations more often. They acknowledge your feelings instead of dismissing them. They become increasingly willing to discuss uncomfortable topics. They make an effort to repair misunderstandings instead of disappearing whenever conflict appears. These changes happen because emotional safety encourages emotional courage. Every positive interaction teaches the nervous system that closeness no longer represents danger. Slowly, defensive habits begin losing their power. Fear still exists, but it no longer controls every decision. This process requires consistency from both people rather than perfection from either one. Protecting a rare connection also requires letting go of unrealistic expectations. No relationship exists without differences. Every individual carries unique experiences, emotional patterns, strengths, and weaknesses. Expecting another person to think, react, and communicate exactly as you do creates constant disappointment. Wisdom begins when you stop demanding sameness and start appreciating healthy differences. Communication becomes far more effective when curiosity replaces accusation. Instead of asking, "Why do you always pull away?" ask, "What happens inside you when things become emotionally intense?" Instead of assuming rejection, seek understanding. Questions invite openness. Accusations invite defensiveness. The quality of your conversations often depends upon the quality of the questions you ask. There is also great power in remaining consistent with your own values. Do not abandon your standards simply because you fear losing someone. Healthy love never requires you to sacrifice your dignity, ignore repeated disrespect, or silence your genuine needs. Compassion and self-respect must exist together. Without self-respect, compassion becomes self-neglect. Without compassion, self-respect becomes emotional distance. A relationship becomes truly rare when both individuals inspire growth within each other. One person learns greater emotional openness. The other learns greater patience and understanding. Both become stronger because they refuse to remain imprisoned by old patterns. Instead of repeating the wounds of the past, they begin creating new experiences built upon trust, honesty, and consistency. You must also recognize that healing is rarely linear. There will be moments of progress followed by temporary setbacks. An avoidant person may communicate openly one week and become quieter the next. This does not automatically mean everything has been lost. Growth often moves forward in small waves rather than straight lines. The important question is whether the overall direction continues moving toward greater connection rather than greater distance. Observe whether responsibility accompanies progress. A person who truly wants the relationship will acknowledge mistakes instead of constantly making excuses. They will recognize how their actions affect you. They will attempt repairs after misunderstandings. They will gradually become more dependable because preserving the connection has become more valuable than protecting old defense mechanisms. One of the quietest signs of a meaningful relationship is when neither person feels the need to control the other. Trust replaces surveillance. Respect replaces pressure. Honest conversations replace emotional games. Both individuals feel free to remain themselves while continuing to move toward each other rather than away from each other. An avoidant person who chooses to stay present during difficult conversations makes room for your feelings even when vulnerability feels uncomfortable, respects your boundaries while honoring their own, and consistently demonstrates a willingness to grow, is offering something that cannot be measured by dramatic words alone. Protecting such a connection requires wisdom rather than impulse, patience rather than panic, strength rather than control, and the quiet confidence to build a relationship where love is strengthened not by chasing one another, but by choosing each other again and again through mutual understanding, steady effort, and unwavering respect.